Yep, you're right. All right, everybody, I want to welcome you back to another episode of Thursday Night Live here at Borver Brewing. I want to thank them again for allowing us to be here. Enjoying the space again and the food. It looks like some are still chomping down, so you better hurry up and finish that so you can tie. But yeah, so excited to be here again. Thank you guys for tuning in from home, if that's where you're at. Let us know where you're from. It's always good to kind of be able to touch base and see how far our reach is, and then we're kind of getting to people all over the place. Just a couple of announcements for tonight. Don't forget to tip your bartender. They're working hard for you, so don't forget to be thankful for that as well. Little reminder for us here at Fly Fishing Borver Outfitters for our guide schools. We've got 2 coming up again this year. So one's here in the spring in April, and then we're doing another one in September. If you have any interest in that, don't hesitate to go to our website or to message us through social media, whatever it might be. And yeah, let us know if it's something you'd be interested in. Besides that, summer booking has started up. We are getting quite full in the busy times of year. Shoulder seasons are always, there's more availability there. So spring and fall, there's lots of availability. We still have availability in the summer as well, but it does book fast. So let us know if you want to do a trip with us this summer. We would love to have you out. We're also been working a lot, guys, here on this Fly Fishing Academy. So Fly Fishing Borver Academy. And what that is, more or less, is just we're trying to educate in any other way that we can. So we do this Thursday Night Live, love teaching fly tying, but there's obviously a lot more to fly fishing than just tying flies. So if you have any suggestions on other things you would like to learn, so a lot of things we've done so far as we're working education to start off with is a lot of knot tying, a few tips for winter fishing. We have a lot more we're in the process of doing, but if there's something you particularly would like to know about, if you have questions about, don't hesitate again to email us or message us, and we'll make sure that we might get a video out for it or answer the question right away. Either one, okay? That sound good? All right. Besides that, this week we're kind of doing we're not doing a whole saltwater month this year. We did last year. This year we're taking on just 1 week of saltwater flies, and instead of doing like warm water, we're doing some more cold water saltwater flies. So this week, kind of specifically on striper or striped bass flies. So we're going to do 2 different patterns. This one, well, both of them are actually not just for striped bass or striper fishing at all. They are very, you can use them from so many different species, but there are a couple of really good patterns. So we're going to tie this one first. It's called a half and half. So it takes a clouser and a deceiver, and we kind of put them together, and this is the pattern called the half and half. Then we're going to tie this guy here, which is the EP Fibers peanut butter fly. So we're going to do these 2 different patterns today. Both of them are bait fish, a little bit bigger than things we've been working on so far. So yeah, nothing too small, not a dry fly, anything like that. We'll do a couple streamers. So we'll start off with this one. So for you guys who have packs of material with you, what we have for this initial fly is we're going to use 2 different colors of bucktail, and we are going to use some flash, which I passed around to you guys. This is just some Flashaboo. We're using a couple of feathers to make our tail, and that's just a saddle hackle. So nothing too expensive, anything like that. Just a nice broad feather to make a nice tail. Some dumbbell eyes, and we're going to tie it on a jig hook today. So we're kind of just changing it up. It's not classically tied on a jig hook. There's a bit of a craze with jig hooks, both in small flies and in bigger flies. So the advantages or disadvantages to a jig hook, there could be many, but the thought is when you're fishing in deeper water, you just have to change the angle that your line is meeting your fly at. So they say it's called a jig hook. It's meant to be more of a jigged pattern. So if you're fishing deeper water, it can be, to my understanding, a better hook to use. Okay, so what we're going to start with is in your pack there, you're going to have a jig hook. So what this is this is just a 2/0 mustad jig hook. Nothing too special, nothing too crazy. I wouldn't be going to chase giant fish. As you can see, this is it's got a lot of flex in the hook. Not super thick wire, but it more than serves a purpose for what we will be using it for today on this fly, and it makes a big difference. You can change the pattern significantly just based upon the thread color you use. So for instance, if you look at this guy here I tied first, I tied it with the black thread. So it's got a nice black nose. The underbody, you're going to see all your threads, just kind of to show that if you're using a darker thread, it's going to show a little bit more of your work than if you use a white one. And so this is tied with white thread, and so most of it's all hidden in. You're not going to see much. And the nose looks white, which kind of matches in with the rest of the colors we're working with today. So kind of a classic is olive over white would be probably one of the more classic colors to use for a clouser or a deceiver. We're going to use a bit more of a chartreuse. You guys have a little bit darker color than this, but for the most part, it's chartreuse over white. Yeah, that's what we're going to tie with. So I'm using just a UTC white thread today. This is UTC 140. So we want a little bit of thickness to work with. So I go with a little thicker thread on this. So we're going to start just behind the bend of that jig portion of the fly there. Okay, so we're just going to get our thread started, and we're going to run a nice thread base back, not all the way into the bend. We'll stay up on top of the bend a little bit. We're just going to run it back, get it as far back as we can, just getting a nice little coating. Put down a thread. Don't have to go all the way into the bend though, and then we're going to bring our thread back forward. So you guys have a set of dumbbell eyes in there. So dumbbell eyes, you could use just the ones you have there are just a lead, just kind of a standard lead eye. The ones I'm going to tie with, just for the purpose of being able to see them a little better, I'm going to use a painted eye. So these are a little bit more realistic, kind of 3D looking eyes. But where I want to tie them in, so I want to leave myself space because a lot of us go with the green, not the black. So I'm going to need that one for this one. There's some more. You find it? Okay, sorry. So when we tie in our dumbbell eyes, we want to think, I'm kind of gauging it off the size of this bend right here. So from the bend to the eye, if I think about coming back onto the hook, creating that same distance here, the length from here to here is where I'm going to put my eyes. I want to leave enough room that I can build up a little bit of a head. And if I don't do that, we're going to become severely crowded in the front. And if you thought it was hard to work with a crowded eye when it's a regular hook, it's even worse on a jig hook because you don't have anything to butt up against. So then your threads end up slipping around that bend, and we don't want that because if they do that, you're gonna lose it. They're all gonna come undone. So err on the side of going too far back because it really makes no difference how much room we have to work with on the shank, especially on this size of the pattern. So I'm gonna leave myself a nice generous amount of room. When attaching these dumbbell eyes, I come in on top. You can see that the eyes are thin in the middle, right in the middle section. So I come over and I put a cross thread onto it. So that's just one or two threads. I'm then going to change the direction and come back over, make sure I go the other way. And now you're just going to do figure eights for the most part. So just doing a figure eight around both eyes. Sometimes I want to go just around the eyes and not on the hook at all. But you're going to notice it's really wobbly still. So you want to put lots of wraps down. So you're going to do lots and lots. It's going to want to spin on you a little bit. Just keep reorientating it because for this pattern, we want it to stay right on top of the hook. So you got to get quite a few thread wraps down. If you do too many on one side, let's say for me here, I'm just going on one side, you're going to see it actually tips the dumbbell eyes so they're off center. So to get them to come back to center, I have to put the equal amount of thread wraps on the other side. Okay, until I get it bound down, it's nice and even. All we're trying to achieve is that those suckers aren't going to move, aren't going to go anywhere on us. So those are nice and solid for me now. I know they're not going to spin around the hook because I want them to stay right where they are. Now what I like to do is I like to go in, I'm just going to use a Zap-A-Gap, any kind of resin. We're going to go in on the underside of this and just touch it. So we're really locking that in there and it's not going to go anywhere. We don't want those to move on us. And we locked it down good. So a Zap-A-Gap or any type of resin, even UV resin is fine. Again, the only one of the few downsides I find with the UV resin, even the thin stuff, is it is slippery. So if you go to put thread wraps over it, your material doesn't want to stay on top of it very well. So in this case, I'm a huge advocate for UV resin, but on this pattern I like to use a glue. Anytime I'm working with bucktail, I like to use a more secure glue. Okay, so what we're going to do after this is we're going to come right down to where we left off our thread. Now if for some reason you guys don't have quite enough bucktail in there, I will pass around this little chunk to do this portion. First of all though, I want to show you what this bucktail looks like. So if I'm looking at this entire bucktail, we have a lot of different places on it for hair. Do you guys mind just zoom out of this so you can see this whole bucktail for me? So on this whole bucktail here, if we take pieces of hair from up here at the tip, they're completely different than hair that I take down from the butt. Differences being some are more hollow, Sometimes the length can change, but what we use them for out of a bucktail, it definitely changes depending on the pattern. So if I'm coming down into this stuff here, right at the butt, if I put that on, I pull tight on it, it's going to flare it right up. It's going to stand up really high. Really good for pike flies. We do a lot of that where we reverse tie or we flare hair so we get it to stand up to build profile. But when we're trying to make a more sleek look where we don't want it to stand up off of there, we want to come more towards the tip of the bucktail. So most of what you guys have there is from the top half of the fly. Okay, so if I come up into this white material here, this hair, I put it on and I pull tight as I want, it's not going to flare at all. Okay, it just doesn't flare. It's not hollow. It's a very dense hair up at the tip, meant for shedding water, which is also perfect for this type of fly. So yeah, so when we look at a bucktail, you kind of start at the bottom. This is going to flare the most. This isn't going to flare at all. And as we move up the tail, we kind of have that little bit of change. So the stuff in the middle will still flare a bit, but it's going to be less than the bottom. Up at the top is going to flare very little. Okay, so just a little bit of stuff to kind of learn with bucktail when you're using it. So this section here that I have is just the very butt. So I've used up the whole tail, whole top of a fly or a top of a bucktail. I'm just going to take a really small chunk. So you don't need to take much of the white that you have there. Just a small little piece of it. I'm going to clean out the underside. And I'm just going to have just a few pieces of hair. And all I'm using this for is when this is going to flare for me a little bit. I'm going to put it here, and it's just going to help those, the feathers I put on next to hold themselves out so they're not always sticking to each other. So when I come in here, I'm going to leave this hair right up on top of the hook and take some nice thread wraps so it flares just a little, but not much. It's just to try to keep the feathers we put in next to stay away from that one area. Now I'm just going to take this remaining hair and I'm going to bind it down to the top of the hook. I'm going to go almost to the eyes and then I'm going to snip it out. I don't want to go right up into the eyes with this. So if you need any more bucktail, guys, you can pass that around. You should have enough, but just in case. So from this point, you're going to have a couple of those hackle feathers. Somebody take my big hackle feathers. Okay, so this is just a simple saddle hackle. I'm going to take 2 feathers, so you guys should have a couple in there. Kind of long and narrow, thin is what we're looking for. Just take 2 of them that are similar. Take this guy here. Okay. And so you're going to see that, oh, that one's not straight at all. Grab this one. So you're going to see that on this feather, it's got a lot of fluff at the back end. We're not going to be working with that fluff at all. So you can go in there, leave just a little bit of the fluff at the top, just a little bit, and peel the rest off the stem. Just pull it back out of the way so you can tie this in seamlessly. Okay? So when I go to gauge the overall length that I want to do, I'm really not gauging off the hook. I'm not gauging off anything like that. All I want to see is a little bit of those fuzzies because that's going to add a little bit to the tail. So I just left just like 5 or 6 fibers on top, same on the bottom, and that's where I'm going to tie it in. But when I look at this feather, it has a concave side, so it's got a top side and a bottom side. I want these feathers to move away at the back end. So what I do is if I have it at this angle, this is my underside, I want the underside to point out. Okay? Point outwards, and I'm going to come in and tie it in just behind that first bit of bucktail. Just tie in that stem, make sure it's good and secure, and then you can snip it out. And just repeat that on the other side as well. So again, I'm going to leave just a little bit of fluffies, peel the rest out, find which side is my underside, and that's the side I want to point away. And on the second one you put in, you want to try to match up the length of the tail. So if the one feather on one side is one length, we want to measure and have it be the same length on the other side. And then again, we can go in and snip it out. So you're probably going to have somewhere between a 5 and 6 inch fly with the size of material that we've got for you, which is pretty perfect. We're kind of looking for those, mullet or small shad, things that are going to be in about that kind of size. So then we're just going to bind down any little bit of that material we can have sticking out. I'm then going to flip, if you have a rotary vise, then just flip it upside down. If you don't, then just take the hook out and flip it around to the other side. And now we're going to get using that flash that you have there. So you want to take about 3 pieces of flash, 3-4 pieces. This is just a thin Flashabou in crystal color. You can definitely use the regular pattern calls for crystal flash, which is very common on a Clouser. We're going to use this Flashabou today. I just kind of like it. It's a little different. So what I'm going to do with this Flashabou, guys, is it's got an overall length that's pretty long. I'm going to come down to my thread, and I'm going to fold it around my thread. So it's folded like so. And I'm going to gauge, so I got half of it on one side of the thread and half of it on the other. So when I go to tie this down, it's equal in size. So when I come and I match my tips, they look pretty close. And then if you see what I do here, is I pull the Flashabou up, and it's attached to my thread here. I can control where I want it to go down. So I'm going to come in right behind the eyes, and I'm going to take a couple thread wraps to secure it right on top. And this next part's pretty important. What I'm going to then do is, while holding it, this worked really easily. They kind of splayed apart for me. We're going to have, in this case, I'm going to have three pieces of Flashabou on each side. So I'm going to grab those 3. I'm going to grab the other 3, and I'm going to kind of pinch them with my other finger. So what I've done, see if I can show you, is I've taken it and I've split it. So I've got half on one side of the hook shank and half on the other. Still, all the while, more or less keeping it on top of the hook shank. Just want it to be half on one side of the hook, half on the other. And then I'm just going to secure it all the way back to that tail. Okay. Once I have it all the way back there, I can let it go. And for this particular fly, you won't even need to trim that Flashabou. It's going to be the perfect length. Okay. And I'm going to bring my thread right back up to behind the eyes, flip my hook around so the orientation is back to the way we started. And I'm going to pass my thread to in front of the eyes. Just make sure I got that good thread base down there. I'm going to come and leave my thread about same distance or the same size of eyes kind of gap in front of it. And then I'm going to get back to my bucktail again. So in this case, if you're looking at the same orientation as I have here, remember that where the dumbbell eyes sit, so in this case, right now, it looks like they're on top of the hook. That wherever the dumbbells are, that's the way that the hook is going to turn in the water, and the dumbbells will always end up on the bottom. So in this case, when this fishes, it's going to fish like so. So the dumbbell eyes are always going to flip the hook over because they're the heaviest thing on the hook, and that's what's going to pull the eyes to the bottom. So right now, the way we're tying it in, we need to imagine this is actually the bottom of the fly. So the bottom of the fly is going to be white. So we normally go dark over light when we're tying this pattern. So more of a white belly and a dark back. So we're going to start by working with our white bucktail. So I'm going in and I'm taking about a pencil width thickness worth of hair, which I'm going to cut out. So about a pencil width. So it's important once you cut it out to go in there and clean out the back side of it. So when you initially cut it out, it's not going to be super even, and there's going to be all this kind of fluffy under part. So what I do to first kind of stack my hair is I take my palm, like so, and I just take the butts and I push them into my palm. And that stacks them up for me. Then I can re-grab. And now, for the most part, they stack themselves up. Okay? Now I want to come up here and grab the tips. So I come up here to grab the tips, and I pull out all that under. Just got that under hair. We're going to pull that out. Okay? And then I want to come back and grab the butts again. So I'm left with maybe a little under that pencil thickness. For the most part, our butts should be pretty even. I'll just trim them quick so they are. But a little piece here that can make this easier and to help not crowd your head too much is we're going to cut a little bit of a taper into the head. So if I come and I hold it up here, I know that I want it to be thinner up here by the nose than it is back here. So I don't want to make a drastic angle, but I'm going to come here and cut it at an angle. So I have a little bit longer fibers up by the nose than I do just behind it. If that makes sense. Now remember that little trick we talked about last week. You're going to take your bobbin and you're going to rotate it, in this instance, clockwise. So I rotate it clockwise. This way, when I grab it, it's going to leap backwards. So you saw how my thread went right back and it's reaching as far back as it can against that hair. I'm going to take a loose collecting wrap, take another wrap, and then start tightening down. Okay, so you're going to have those shorter fibers. You might miss a couple of them, but for the most part, you should get them all in. And we're just trying to create that nice ramp so that, in this case, I got lucky and it worked out perfectly. But your hair ends right at the front of that turn, that 90-degree turn in the jig. And we want to keep our thread a little bit back from it. We don't want to take thread wraps that go over top of it. So the whole time you'll notice I haven't let go of that hair. I'm still holding it because what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a regular, more standard clouser pattern, like I'll show you on this one here, you see how I brought the thread and I wrapped that white all the way back to the hook bend? In this fly, I prefer not to do that. Classic half and half is tied like this, but we're only going to take a couple thread wraps behind the eye, just so it actually makes the body look fuller and kind of covers up some of our work as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm still holding this. I'm going to slide my fingers back so now you can see behind the eyes. I'm going to take my thread and advance it just behind the eye, and then I'm going to take some thread wraps over that hair, and I want that hair to stay right on top of the hook shank. Okay, so you notice that I didn't let go still because I want that hair to stay right on top of the hook shank. I'm going to take like 10 good wraps, and then I can let it go. We're just building that profile on the fly, and you can see it's built a nice taper for us. So that white is tapered right into that tail, into that flash, and out the back end. So that's the bottom of our fly. And if you got any butts that are kind of sticking out, it's a good time to go in and trim them out because we're going to be adding some more on the other side, and it's best if it doesn't get out of hand. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I didn't put this in your packages because I didn't think of it at the time, but I'm going to show you one little added trick that can be good. And all I'm taking is just a little tiny bit of red dubbing. And if I take that dubbing, just not getting fancy with it at all, just putting a little bit on this. All I'm trying to imitate here is just creating a bit of a gill plate. So it looks like the gills of a bait fish. And I'm just taking some thread wraps to make a little red ball right there. Once I've finished that up, I'm just going to then go and advance my thread in front of the eyes. And I'm going to flip it upside down now. Okay? So now I'm working from the bottom side. And now, guys, we're just going to move on to grab whatever your darker color is. So in this instance, we're going to go with that nice chartreuse color. And we're again going to go in and get that good pencil width worth of hair. And again, for me on this one, we want that hair up at the top of the tail because it's going to be the straightest. It's not going to flare for us. I'm going to take a nice pencil thickness, clean it out. You don't have red in your package. I just added that just now just to show a little change and variation in the pattern. So again, we're going to go in and clean out those butts. And guys, if you get to the point where you've cut out the hair, for you guys, because we kind of put little portions, it's different, but when you have a whole tail you're working from, if you pull out too much hair, you are much better off to take some out. Don't try to get all that hair on the hook. So for instance, this time I'm like, it's a little bit much, so I'm just going to go in and take some out. You kind of, when you tie enough of them, you get a feeling for what it should feel like and how much you want in there. And then you're just kind of comfortable with it. You know what you want to work with. But you want it to be about the same as you had on the top. Perfect. So we're going to do basically the exact same thing. We're going to even them up, and I'm going to cut a little bit of angle onto that. Not too much again, just a little bit. So I've got that angle cut. Now this one, guys, is harder to work with because you're working around that hook that's in the way. So you kind of got to give yourself a little bit more space to work with. So your fingers kind of got to be up high so you're not poking yourself in the hook. And again, we're going to do the same thing. Do that that clockwise spin. We're going to gather that hair back kind of closer to the eye. Get a couple of good securing wraps, and we can slowly advance it forward up to that bend. But remember, we don't want that hair to go all the way into that jig. So again, We want that nice tapered look. And I'm still holding that hair straight up because I want to bring some thread wraps pretty close back to the eyes. Making sure that doesn't go anywhere. And what I do to know where I, again, want to be 50-50 on one side of the hook is the other, all I got to do is hold this straight up and come and push it up against that hook. You can kind of take a look from the front. Yeah, that looks good. I got half on one side, half on the other. You just separate it out and pull it on either side of the hook. And once you kind of got it even, it's actually a lot easier once we have this out of the vise to you can adjust that again if you need to. Okay, so that looks pretty clean already, guys. Especially with white on top, a little bit of that chartreuse comes through, which I like. You can see a little bit of that chartreuse on the back of the fly coming through, but we do need to make sure that we got enough thread wraps, that it's good and secure. Again, a bit of warning, stay away from that bend, because if you go into it, then your thread wraps want to slide right around it. I'm going to come back to just behind the eyes, and I'm going to whip finish my fly. And that is the half and half, guys. A really good, effective pattern, and I'm going to say even a really good, effective pattern for trout. A lot of fish have been caught on a clouser, been caught on a deceiver. That's what they were originally designed. So that clouser, either of those patterns is really good, and this one we kind of just split the idea and we go half and half. But yeah, great pattern. So once you cut your thread, make sure you put some type of resin all over those wraps, because we don't want to lose any of that work we just did. Okay? So again, nice and simple pattern, but we don't want to lose what we've done. So I just come in, I'm going to touch all of that nose, make sure none of it's going to move. Put nice thread wraps all over top of it. Or sorry, not thread wraps, put glue all over top of it. And there we go. That is our half and half. And it's really nice if at that point you take it out of your vise, you can get a good look at it. You can kind of see the profile you've created. Really awesome. And like I said, if I turn this and show this to the camera now, I can easily pull that green hair up and adjust it again. Just readjust it. If I got all of it on one side and it's too much on one side, I can just lift it up, bring it back down. So we have half on one side, the hook, half on the other. Okay? That's our half and half. Great pattern, great saltwater pattern, great freshwater pattern, and we'll definitely catch striped bass, which is kind of our theme tonight. Okay? Do we have any questions on that pattern, guys?
For me, fly fishing is one of my biggest passions.
Pretty good. Awesome. And it's everybody kind of has their theory.
Guys are very, you know, they don't want to hold hands or all that kind of stuff, but just be in a position so that if he needs to lean on you, he can do it. It's always good practice when you guys sit up. Keep braced, guys, right? Yeah. Stay in the braces. Stay square on the boat. And then get them pumped for this next run. So get us pumped.
Yeah, so when I first came in, the fishing was like, I thought it was all about that. No, that's not the case, which is great, right? That's probably the biggest takeaway I got was the people experience.
Yeah, we are in a brewery, so I guess that is kind of the point. It does help when the beer's good. I don't think there's any complaints on how the beer tastes around here.
Beer, food, service.
Yeah, beer, food, and service. If you got that trifecta, it's pretty awesome. Okay, guys, that is our half and half. Awesome pattern. Okay. Our next pattern is going to be a little bit more of a, I like kind of call it a planning fly. So I plan on my materials as I'm doing it. So I'm set up and ready to go with the next piece every time. It's a little bit different style of tying in materials. We're going to more or less stack materials on top of themselves. So this is called an EP, so it can be tied with a couple different things. And this, the original was called an EP fiber peanut butter fly. So what this is just a whole bunch of this, I can't say his name. EP stands for a guy's name, but it's not an easy one to say. Enrico something. I think he's maybe Italian. Yeah. What was the name of that? Was that guy? Yeah, but what was the name? Antonio Inigo Montoya's. Yeah, Inigo Montoya's. Yeah. Something like that. Sorry for butchering your name. Yeah. So, yeah, prepare to die. So this pattern, tonight we're tying with EP fibers. Another really good material to tie with is an SF blend. So SF blend has a lot of flash built into it, whereas tonight we're going to add a little flash. You can see right down the middle of this fly, kind of the midline, we have a flash that's put in there. And because you're tying it actually on quite a small hook, that flash stays right in the midline as you build that fly out, and we kind of trim it to be the right out at the tail. Okay, so tonight, like I said, we're going to tie it with EP fibers. I'm going to tie a black over tan. You guys have either a black over tan or a black over olive. So olive will be on the bottom, black will always be on top, and the tan will be on top if you have that color. Okay, and then all we're going to do is we're going to stick on some eyes, and it just really finishes off the pattern. Pretty simple. These look really great in the water. There's tons of movement in these materials. It looks very realistic. So another good baitfish pattern. We'll kind of get started. I'll kind of explain my process of doing it. So we're going to tie this on, what I'm going to tie mine on tonight is just this is a Daiichi 2546 saltwater hook. This is a size 2. So there's lots of different hooks to tie it on. You quite commonly see it on just a saltwater, really short shank hook, a really aggressive gap in the hook gap, so you want a nice hook gap. This is another great hook for it. So there's lots of different ones to use. So once you go ahead and get that secured in your vise, we really only have 3 materials that we're working with on this pattern. So we got that EP fiber, we got a little bit of that flash that we had from the first fly, and then we're going to stick eyes on it. So we'll go ahead first. We'll start our thread up here behind the eye, and this time I'm going to go with a black UTC 140. I again like the 140. It holds this material a little bit better. Again, personal preference. Start your thread behind the eye, work it back, and this time, guys, we're not even tying all the way back into the bend. So I want you to stop your thread right about at the hook point. That's about as far as we're going to go. You're going to take some of that flash that you had. So again, if you got, there was some in the bags as well. So if you've got 2, 3, 4 pieces, 3 is probably enough because you're going to double it over just like we did last time. Is plenty. So I've got 3 pieces. I'm going to do just what I did on that last time on that other fly. I'm going to fold it around my thread. I'm going to even out the tips. So I've kind of got half on one side, half on the other. Once I got it nice and even, I'm just going to bring it up, pull my thread down. So you get to really decide where you want it on your hook when you do it this way by folding materials around. So I get to decide where I want it. So I'm going to stick it right here. It's going to take a few thread wraps because I want this to stay right on top of the hook. Okay, that's going to kind of keep it right in the midline. So this flash is going to be too long, but we'll trim it after. Okay. So working with this EP fiber can be pretty easy to work with it, but it's not easy to get it out of the package and to get the amount you want without wasting a bunch. When we were packing your packs today, I probably wasted 3, 4 flies worth of the material just trying to separate it. It's just kind of a funky synthetic. It binds itself together quite well in the packaging and can be difficult to get the amount you want off. What I'll say about this material is a little bit goes a very long ways. Do not get aggressive with how much you put on to start with. It just builds up really fast and it kind of changes the appearance of the fly. So when I come in on a piece of it like this, so let's say for you guys with the black you have there, what I need you to do is I need you to separate it into 3 separate piles that are even. Okay? So for me, my first one, I'm going to go in not very much at all here, guys. That's actually even a little bit too much because it's going to be doubled. This first one's not going to be doubled over, but the rest of them are. So when you kind of pull it tight, it's not very much material. Set that aside. So that's going to be our first one. Then in the other 2 that you have, so I'm going to take it and separate another clump off. So I've got it like so. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and fold it in half so it's even on both sides, but keep them separate like so. Go in and cut them perfectly in half. So now I've got 1 long one and 2 short ones. So it helps guys to do it this way. Trust me, just go in and you plan out your pieces before you tie the fly. It makes it easier. So at this point I had one long piece still, and I've cut it in half once, so that's 1, 2 more. And I'm going to do that one more time. So you should have had, I said to break it into 3 clumps. So that third clump, you're going to go in and do the same thing, fold it in half. So I got it even on either side. Go up and cut it. And keep those separate again. And now we're going to repeat that exact same process with your other color. Okay? So for me, I'm gonna tie it over this cream color. So again, I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I'm gonna leave one long. That again is too much. This is a great material for building crabs with, and we did it last year in our salt month. Great material for doing that. So again, into those 3 clumps, and then have one long one. And then 2 of them you're going to split in half. It's really, you probably have too much material with you there, guys. I can't emphasize enough, it doesn't take much. Don't feel like you need to use all your material. It adds up real quick. So same with the cream, or for some of you it's green. You're going to want one long piece, and then you're going to want four that are cut in half. What you looking for, Cam? We're out of black. Oh, there's some right there. You can use that. So if you're kind of production tying a whole bunch of these, you do a lot of setup, and I will do a lot of work to kind of get prepped before I do it. And even as I'm looking at it now, I'm like, that was too big, that was too thick, so I'm going to go and take a little bit off. When I go to put it on the fly, you'll get a little better idea for what it looks like as we move forward. Woo. So once I have all my piles set up, this is actually quite similar to how I would tie a crab as well. I would prep all this material and have it all tied up, or all cut up. Okay, so we're going to tie one color in on top, fold it back over itself, flip it upside down, tie in the next one, come back to the top, tie in the next one. We're going to go top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, all the way up to the front. So we tie in the tail section, and then we do the additional ties. So we do 4 more ties in, and that's where we're going to build the material. Don't get discouraged by what yours looks like as we're building it, because to get the shape that I have here, I've done a whole lot of tapering and cutting. So I've done a lot of cutting to get that there. Okay, so don't worry about what it looks like as we're building it, because we do work to make it look better after. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that long piece of black. Okay, so I had that nice long one. This is going to be way too long for the fly, but that's part of the trimming process. So I'm going to take half of it. Right before I do though, guys, we're going to do this on every piece. So this one's kind of already looks tapered, but what you want to do is you want to come up to the tip and just pull those some of the tips out, just so you got a little bit of a tapered look on one side, while keeping it pinched. Just pull down to the bottom, and what that does is that also builds the taper on the butt end. Okay? It's not going to matter a ton on this because we're going to trim a lot of this tail out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it at that halfway point, so I go in and find where that halfway point is. I'm going to take that halfway point, and I'm going to tie it in right on top. Get one kind of wrap to hold it in place, and then take a couple more. I'm taking a couple more back into that tail, kind of over top of that flash. And then I'm going to take, now we're going to do this every time. I'm going to take a few thread wraps forward. So what this does is builds even more taper. And it's not important on this piece because we're going to end up cutting this one. But by coming forward with my thread, it's obviously shortened this one. It's made it a little bit shorter than the original one I tied in. So it's going to look a little shorter. It's going to taper itself as we go. Then I'm going to fold it back over top, and I'm going to tie it down. Okay, and I'm going to tie it almost right back up against that other piece. Okay, so it looks like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate that, flip it upside down, and I'm going to repeat that exact same process with your underbody color. So for me, that's cream. So I'm going to take it.
You flipped your vise?
I just turn it upside down. Yeah, yours should probably turn as well. Yeah, just pick up your vise and flip it upside down on the table.
I tried. It doesn't work.
So you'll see as I'm
That's why
going,
you don't tie.
I just keep adjusting how much material, guys, because I kind of know once I have it and I pull it tight how much material I want. And if it looks like too much, you don't want to use it, okay? So again, taper it a little bit. Find the halfway point. Now the underside is always harder to work with because you're constantly working around that hook, okay? So when I come in at this, as soon as I go in, I want to poke it through that hook so that half of it's on one side already. I go in, tie it down, advance my thread a little bit like I did the last time, then flip it back over, and again, punch that through. So half of it's going on one side, half it's going the other, and then as we go, it looks like it's a mess, but it's not. We just got to pull it so half of it goes on one side, half of it goes on the other. But what you don't want to do in this process is accidentally tie in one material or the other on the edges of the fly. You want it to stay right on the bottom and right on the top. So we want to have a very distinct line in the color change. So you want it to look black like that line. We want that line to maintain the whole time we're tying through this pattern. Okay? So that's our first one. It's really long. Don't worry about it. We'll come back to the trimming process later. Now what I want to do is I want to advance my thread back in front of the bump. That little bump that I had left there because I had advanced my thread, I'm going to go up to just in front of that bump. Okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of those short pieces of my dark color, so my black. And this time it becomes more important that I taper it. So I'm going to come in, so I got my tips just like so. I'm going to grab and I'm just going to taper by pulling some of them out. So it's got that more tapered look. Again, I'm going to fold them in half so I know where the halfway point is, and I'm going to tie it in. Now this is going to look significantly shorter, but again, just bear with me, we're going to trim this to shape afterwards, okay? So then I'm going to tie that in on top. Again, making sure it doesn't move, stays right on top. I can see it like so. I come up. I want to advance some thread wraps forward. And you see I'm constantly pulling up on that material so that it doesn't spin around the hook. I want it to stay right up on top. So just like I said last time, we want to advance it forward about a hook eye. So if I look at my hook eye, how big that is, I want to go maybe a hook eye and a half is the gap that I'm going to create there. I'm going to fold it back over top. Keeping it right up on top again though, not letting it go anywhere. And put a couple thread wraps. And I can move back in front of it. Now if where my thread is just finished is where I want to tie in my bottom material. So you got to imagine you don't want to wrap back over all the top of this to get to where I started, where I left off with this bump on the bottom, because then I would just be wrapping over material. I don't want that. So when I wrap back onto that black, that little bit of a bump, I'm going to leave it there, flip my vise upside down again. Now I'm going to go at it with my next small piece of underbody. Again, I'm going to taper it a little bit. Come up and taper. And this does seem like a lot, guys, when you're first doing this pattern, but once you get a little better at them, they actually do build quite quickly. And some guys, as they go, I've watched a lot of different people tie this pattern, but as they go on every bump, they'll go in and they'll just take a little touch of head cement on every one, just because they don't want any chance of those rotating around the hook. They want them to always stay where they are. I don't normally do that, but just to show you. Okay, so I found my halfway point on this underbody color. I'm going to come in, kind of split it on the hook. Tie it down. Advance my thread forward a bit. About that hook eye again. I'm going to fold it back and try to separate it right off the hop here, down either side of the hook. And once I've done that, then I come in, put some thread wraps up over top of it. And I'll go through at times in the middle of a pattern and just pull it. So I get all the materials that go on either side of the hook where I want them to be. I'm not fighting with it. And I'm going to come back up to the top side again. Get it re-secured to my vise. And now I'm back in front of that bump again that I created on the top one. So I'm going to advance my thread just slightly ahead of that bump, and I'm going to go up to my next one. So I got another black one I'm going to put on top. Again, taper it a little bit. Find the halfway point, or roughly. We tie it in. And I advance my thread forward a little bit more. I fold it back. Pin it down. Whoop. Making sure I got some good thread wraps down on it. And this is where the pace picks up, guys. Once you get good and you know what you're doing on top and bottom, then we're gonna cycle through those 4 pieces, those 4 smaller pieces we created. We're just gonna go dark light, dark light, dark light until we run out of material. And hopefully, if we planned it right, every hook's a little different depending on how long the hook shank is, but you should be right about where you're supposed to be when you get to the end, which is right up against that eye. So I'm going to go with my underbody color again. Get it, make sure it stays right on the bottom. Advance my thread forward a little bit. Fold it back. And always be careful of that hook because it'll poke you quite a few times in this process most likely. Make sure you split those materials again. It's a little bit easier to split them when they're short like that.
That's why you invest in rotary vise.
Yes, the rotary vise makes this a lot easier. And now I'm going to flip back over. I'm going to go back to the top again. So now I know that I've got 2 more tie-ins, and then I'm done with both materials. So you kind of start to gauge what this hook is looking like, and you know how much of it you're going to use. We do taper all this material, guys, and a lot of it we do cut out, but I still believe helps, so we're going to keep doing it. What's that, sorry? Question? No? Okay. Again, guys at home, don't hesitate. If you got some questions, shout them out. We'd love to help you answer them. Let us know where you're watching from. Okay, advance that forward a bit. Fold it back again. Good. Getting pretty close now. But even as you're working with it, guys, like I can tell, because I've tied quite a few of these, I'm already not happy with how much material I put on. I feel like I've put too much. It feels a little bit bulky to me. So I will work a little harder at the trimming process. It's easier. Less is more, less is more. Most of the time in fly tying, you can pretty much bank on that being the case. So you'll know the first time you build one of these, kind of what it looks like and maybe what you would have changed if you could do it again. That's that thread forward a little bit. Get sure it stays up on top. It always gets a little dicier because we are encroaching on that head, but remembering we do want to finish right at the eye. So again, split it around the hook. Has anybody in here ever fished for striped bass before? Yeah?
Yeah.
Where at?
Well,
you would.
from Prince Edward Island. So.
Prince Edward Island, so yes, you would have definitely seen them. How about you?
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia?
Kodiak River.
Yeah, Kodiak River?
Yeah.
Are we tying flies you would use?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah? Cool.
Tried out it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're working off of information we read or heard about. Dana and myself are going fish for stripers in June, so we're kind of excited to be our first go at them. But yeah, from my understanding, most bait fish patterns are kind of your go-to, right? So anything that can imitate that.
Try crab patterns, like think saltwater patterns.
Think saltwater patterns too? Yep.
Yeah, or like warm water saltwater patterns.
Right. Crabs and whatnot? What color of crabs did you have there?
You use like brown, reddish.
Brown, red.
Green crabs.
And green. Okay, good to know. Good to know. All right, guys. So now we should be down to 1 clump of each. So I'm going to come back, and we want this to finish pretty much right behind the eye. And it's going to be okay. One of them's not going to be right at the eye because we're kind of tying, staggering now. But you'll see kind of what this looks like once we get it done. So I'm going to tie that down in front of that bump. And on this last one on top, I'm going to advance my thread almost right up into the eye. To advance it, I'm going to fold it back over. Like so. Make sure that's good and secure. Flip it over. go for my last tan piece. Stick it on the bottom. Really making sure that stays on the side that we put it on. And again, advance right down to the eye. I'm going to fill up because I've made a little bit of a gap here, if you can see, where it's a little uneven. Now I'm going to just try to fill that in with a few thread wraps before I fold it back over, just because I am right at the head and I want it to be fairly even looking. So there, now I've got right up to it. I can take some thread wraps right to the eye. Make sure I pull that material on either side of the hook. And after this, guys, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a few turns to make sure you have it good and secure, and then we're going to whip finish the fly. So come in and whip finish. 4 or 5 turn, do it a couple times. And then we're going to get in there with that resin, guys, and really secure those threads so they don't go anywhere. Come in and snip your thread out. And I'm just going to touch it with some super glue. To make sure that it's not going anywhere. Pull all the materials out of the way. Top and bottom, just make sure those thread wraps all kind of get touched. And now if you kind of imagine, guys, you just got all these little rooster tails coming out off the top and the bottom. So this fly is very flat in appearance. If you're looking at it from straight on, it's very narrow. But what it is that helps it in how it swims, right? So it's going to dart left and right a lot more because there's not a lot of bulk in it. And then from the side profile, it's going to look a lot larger. Okay. So once we got that to dry, what we've got to do now is we're going to take it out of our vise. I'm going to kind of show you how we're going to trim it, and then we're going to stick some eyes on it, which you got too. Okay. So if I flip this back up, I'm going to pop it out of my vise here for a second. So if you pull back, you can tell it looks kind of funky and uneven at the moment. So we can imagine that our fly, I'm going to taper it so that the tail is about here. Okay, so we want that nice chubby look to the front of the fly. We're going to waste maybe an inch or two at the back because we didn't need quite all that material, but we need it back there so we can get a good taper. Okay, so what I do, and this is going to be kind of hard to show you necessarily on the camera, I'll do the best to show you, and then I'm going to have to lay it down. I have to lay it down in front of me so I can spread out the fiber and create the angle that I want. So what I do is I pull these fibers out. Okay, so I pull those out at like a 45. All of these fibers. Back to my vise little. Okay, so if you can see it like that, I've pulled all that out. Well, if you see what I've done on this fly, it looks trimmed. So I've cut an angle into it so that it tapers all the way back to where I want it to be. So on this one here, I kind of pick a point. And I normally I start on the bottom because I've got my hook to work with as a gauge. And I come just outside my hook. And once I'm just outside my hook here, I'm going to cut an angle all the way back to where I want it to finish. And I've already estimated that I want that to be about right here. So I take my scissors and I cut from just below there at an angle back to there. And then I do the exact same thing. Then I've got a starting point so I kind of can judge where I made my bottom cut. And I'm going to cut from there to my point. So I'm gonna try to do this vertically so you can see it without putting it down, which is not normally the way I like to do it, but I'll try to do it so I can show you. So if I've got all these materials out like this, I'm kind of imagining where I want it to be. Just give me a second here. I'll try to get this a little bit better in focus so you can see it. Because this is kind of the point, guys. We've done all that work to stack those materials, and that was just the preparation to the point now where we can shape it into the pattern that we want. But Dana's going to come up to us a little closer so we can get a better view on it.
Nice work, Dana.
Okay, so Dana's a little tighter on me now. So what I'm doing is I'm going to come in like this. This is the moment of truth because you can't put material back on. So once you cut. Okay, I'm going to lay this down just so you can watch in the lens. This is how I prefer to do it. So I kind of come in. Yeah. A little easier to see. Maybe not. So I come in, I see where my hook is, and I've said, okay, that's the angle that I want to work on. I know I want to finish right about here because I've already kind of guesstimated that when I pulled on it. So I'm going to stand up a second to do this. So I grab here, I start making my cut. I'm cutting at an angle, and don't be afraid if you don't get it to the perfect shape the first time, okay? So I've made a rough cut for that bottom piece. I'm gonna flip it over. More important is that I'm gonna start my cut for the black, or the top color, to be the same length as there. So I kind of guesstimate again where it is. I'm gonna come in, start cutting that angle all the way into the back. Okay, so I've made my initial cuts. So when I look at this fly now, I've got the kind of the idea. I've got that nice fat head, so all those fibers that are standing up, and all I want is to create a taper all the way to the back. Okay, so this is still too long. I know that I want that to end right about here. So when I come to this, I'm gonna go one more time. And I really like most of this already, so I'm just gonna change it, make a little steeper on some of it, and then I make that final cut into the tail to get the tail fibers out that I don't want. Like so. Don't over trim, guys. That's why I say take a little bit at a time until you kind of get the shape that you want. Like so. So you can see as I turn this around, you're gonna kind of feel that maybe it's a little bulky in some places. So for me, I feel it's a little bulky up in the head here. I'm just gonna trim any of those spare fibers that aren't really where I want them to be. I always find it easiest if I'm holding it like so. So if I can see that shape right away. So for instance, on this one right now, I can tell that in the tail piece, I'm a little bit too belly heavy. So I've got a little bit too much fiber in the belly still. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of trimming in there, out to that taper. And then I'm gonna get it back in my vise, guys. So now I'm happy. I like my taper. All we want to create is that gradual taper out into that tail. So if again you pull out those fibers so you can see them, you get them to kind of stand out. Then when you go to slick them back, as long as you've got a nice taper, that's all you're really looking for. Okay? Doesn't have to be a precise taper. You just want it to be nice and even. Okay? Once I get it back in my vise now we're going to stick some eyes on. Okay? And I do the eyes most of the time with a UV resin up here on the head. So I actually am now going to decide what angle I want this head to look like based upon where I glue those eyes in. So if I glue the eyes, then I can push this back so it looks really flat, or I can puff it up a bit, put the eyes on, cure them, and then that'll hold that head up a little bit bigger, which is kind of what I'm going to go for here. So you've got a couple of eyes in there. Yours are a little smaller than mine. I'm going to go with a little bigger one just to over-exaggerate what this looks like. I also think that on these patterns, you can go with a bigger eye and get away with it. These are just kind of a holographic, gold holographic eye. Again, like I kind of told you before, I always go and I take two of them and I stick them on the back of my hands, because if you put it down somewhere and you're mess of tying stuff, they can be hard to find. So stick them on your hands, you always know where they are. So I'm just using some bone dry Solarez. And what I'm going to do is any resin, a super glue or a UV resin is fine here, guys. Super glue won't set quite as fast because I can cure this with the light. But what I want to do is I want to put those eyes pretty close up to the front of the head, but imagining that I want the eye to finish right up at the front fibers. So I'm going to go in and just stick some resin kind of all over where I know the eye is going to sit. This is not very liquid looking at the moment. So I'll try to show you upside down so you can see it. So now I'll take that eye, I'll stick it on and then show you. So I've got it right about there. It finishes right up by the thread wraps. Then, just because there's a lot of puff in this material, that the UV light really still gets in there and cures it very well without much issue. And I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. And you want to make sure that that glue gets out onto those materials, because that's what it's binding to, not just down into the middle of the fly. I stick that eye on, and I like to flip it a little and gauge it off of the other eye, so I make sure that they're quite even. There we go. And I'm going to come underneath this one, cure this one as well. That's good. And so I've cured it holding those Lee Coyle. Hello, buddy. Should be calling in from Montana somewhere. So I'm pretty happy with where the eye placement is. But what I can do is I can take my UV resin, and if I want to pull that head back a little bit, I can grab it, slick it just a smidge, put a little bit of that UV right up at the head of it, and while holding it, I can cure it. And now it's going to stay at that angle. I like doing it just for a little bit of extra piece of durability. Those eyes shouldn't come off either, but you just never know if you get a few fish on them. So I like to put a little bit of UV resin up against where they kind of tie in. I'm going to cure that there as well. And last piece of the puzzle, just to make sure that you got those thread wraps covered, so none of that work comes undone on you. Cover those thread wraps real good. And there you go, guys. That is our EP peanut butter fly. Really cool baitfish pattern. You can adjust it. I still don't quite like my taper. Adjust it a little bit more. That's better. So in this pattern, guys, obviously there's 1,000 different colors you could do this in, and we'll change it a lot. Remember what I said, we could also do it with SF blend. So SF blend is a lot straighter, flatter fiber, but most SF blend is actually just flash fiber mixed with a similar fiber to this. So it's another great material to use. But yeah, great pattern, lots of colors you could tie it in. Putting that flash in the middle, it might be tough to see in the camera, but that flash stays right in the midline between those two color changes, and it really stands out quite well. It would stand out even better in the water. Okay, guys, those are the flies we have for you tonight. So we got a couple of pretty cool striper patterns. Will also work for a lot of different cases in that. We just kind of picked these ones for our striper week. We want to thank you guys again for coming out tonight. All of you got another big group. It's been great. Thanks again to Ian here at Bow River Brewing. It's been awesome to be here. Thanks for the good beer. For all you guys at home, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you left some comments for us and we can rouse back and forth for the next week. Tell a little bit of information for next week, guys. We will not be here. We're hosting IF4 in Red Deer. So that's February 27th. So we won't be here for next week, but we'll be back on for the show the following week after that. Sound good? And we'll be on to Mountain March. So we're going to be tying a whole series of what we consider to be some of the better flies for our mountain rivers and streams. Okay? All right, again, thanks for coming out, guys. My name's Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bow River Outfitters. See you next time.